A big thinker ponders the prospects for humanity. I'm Tonya Hall, and joining me is Sir Martin Rees, former president of the Royal Society, emeritus professor of cosmology and astrophysics at the University of Cambridge, member of the House of Lords, fellow at Trinity College, and author. Welcome, Sir Martin.
Very good to be on your show.
You're a leading astrophysicist as well as a senior figure in science in the United Kingdom. You recently authored a book on the future, Prospects for Humanity. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, of course, I'm by profession an astronomer, so I think about big scales of time and space. But this particular book really grew out of the fact that I became more and more involved in societal questions. And I think the main theme of my book is this, that the Earth has been around for 45 million centuries. But this is the first century where one species, the human species, has the future of the planet in its hands. And we could lead towards a wonderful future here on Earth and in space beyond. On the other hand, I do worry that there are downsides, and we could, by error or by design, lead to a depleted planet for our forebears.
In chapter 2, you write about the positive forces that science and technology have been and how you're a techno optimist. What guardrails must we apply to emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics, biotech to ensure these continue to be positives?
Well, indeed, that's the main concern we have. And although, as you say, I'm a technical optimist, I'm rather a political pessimist because the gap between the way the world could be and the way the world actually is wide and is getting wider because of the misdirection of technology. But we do indeed have to try to regulate the use of technology. And of course, on a global scale, we want to try to move towards clean carbon-free energy. That's one global challenge. We have to do that. But in the part of my book you're referring to, I discuss bio and cyber and AI. And here I'm very worried because these technologies are extremely powerful, particularly biotech and already cybertech, and even a few people can, by error or by design, have a consequence that could cascade even globally because our world is so interconnected. And of course, for that reason, on prudential grounds and on ethical grounds, we're going to want to regulate technologies, especially biotech, and there are, as you know, regulations already. But my worry is, can we enforce those regulations? We can enforce the regulations on nuclear power and nuclear weapons because those are conspicuous special facilities, and the International Atomic Energy Agency can verify compliance with the regulations. But biotech and cybertech can be done by billions of people in fairly ordinary labs needing ordinary equipment. And my real worry is that regulating these globally is as hopeless as regulating the drug laws globally or the tax laws globally. We can't do either of those. So my worry is that we will have some episodes when there will be a serious cascading disaster caused by misuse of biotech. And of course, already we know that cybertech can cause massive disruption. And so I think this is going to make governance hard and a very great tension between three things we want to have: privacy, liberty, and security.
For most of human history, technological and societal change was measured in decades or even centuries. But now those changes are measured in months and individual years. Do most humans even have the capacity to absorb change at the rates that we see in this digital age?
I think this is a problem. I mean, people are overwhelmed by it, and people are concerned that these technologies will, for the reason you mentioned, run away out of our control. And just a few people may gain control of them. We won't have time for a measured discussion in order to optimize the governance, even though that's going to be a very difficult challenge. So that is a problem. And also, this is paradox that for the reason you mentioned, we are reluctant to plan a long way ahead. even though we need to deal with environmental and climatic challenges. We need to think a century ahead. We're not doing that. And I think there's a rather strange paradox that if we think back to medieval times in Europe, people built cathedrals that wouldn't be finished in their lifetime. They thought on a timescale of 100 years, even though they thought the world might only exist for another 1,000 years. Whereas now we have much vaster cosmic horizons. We know that the world will exist for billions of years. But in terms of planning, we have shorter horizons than our medieval predecessors did. And that is because things are so rapidly changing. They could plan in medieval times because although they thought the world might end in 1,000 years, they thought the lives of their children and their grandchildren would be the same as theirs. So they were happy to add bricks to a cathedral, which their grandchildren would appreciate. Whereas now, we don't know the lives that will be lived by people 50 years from now. And that is an inhibition in planning, which we don't know what to do. But we've got to try and ensure that we do avoid long-term downsides of climate change and all the rest of it, and also ensure that even though we want to harness the benefits of these new technologies, biological and computers and AI, we avoid all the downsides. That's a big challenge. So, I'm afraid I don't have answers in my book.
What are your views on the odds of the universe containing other forms of life, and are we going to actually be able to meet them?
Well, I mean, I think it's a fascinating question. When people learn I'm an astronomer, that's normally the first question they ask. And I have to say, we just don't know. We don't even know how life got started on Earth. We know how simple life evolved by Darwinian selection over 4 billion years into the biosphere that surrounds us and of which we're a part. But the transition between complex chemistry and the first metabolizing, reproducing entities we call alive is still a mystery. But serious people are working on that. And I think in 20 years, we may understand that and whether it was a rare fluke or would have happened elsewhere. And moreover, the other thing that's happened in astronomy is that we've learned in the last decade or two that most of the stars you see in the sky are orbited by a retinue of planets, just like the sun is orbited by the Earth and the other familiar planets. And within 10 or 20 years, we'll have telescopes powerful enough to analyze the light from the planets around the nearest of the stars to test whether they have a biosphere. And so that'll be very, very exciting. Now, this would be a biosphere that may be just simple life or vegetation. And of course, the question of whether there be aliens of the kind we read about with bipeds with eyes on stalks and all that, we don't know. I think that's less likely. But I do think it's worth a search because it's so fascinating. And indeed, I chair a committee in California which is trying to promote a more extended search for evidence for something artificial out there. I think if we detected something, it would be probably not a civilization, not even something organic. It would be some sort of machine. And the reason I say that is because if we think of the likely time chart here on the Earth, then, as I say, it's been 4 billion years for us to evolve. And we've had technology for a few millennia. And within a century or two, it could be that post-human entities, maybe electronic rather than flesh and blood, may take over from us. I think this will happen in space, not here on Earth, because I think the first people who go to Mars will have every incentive to adapt themselves and change to something new. So the scenario on Earth is 4 billion years of unintelligent life, then civilization for a brief period, and then the machines take over, and they will have billions of years ahead of them. So if there was another planet on which life had started, it'd be very unlikely it was synchronized to the extent that we would detect it in the brief sliver of time when it was occupied by something like us. Far more likely that if it's got that far, it's got far beyond that, and we would detect some electronic artifact from it. So that's a long answer to your question, but the main point is we just don't know. Life could be a rare fluke, or it could be that it's very common out there. Of course, as an astronomer, I get letters from people who say they know the answer. They've met the aliens, they've been abducted by them. And I tell these people, do they really think that if the aliens had made the effort to cross interstellar space to visit us, would they just have met one or two well-known cranks, made a corn circle and gone away again? I don't think so. And they tell these people to write to each other and not write to me.
That's a good response. In the late 1970s, we put two golden discs full of human sounds and images into two Voyager interstellar probes and sent them beyond the limits of our solar system. What
Yes.
do you think of repeating a Voyager type mission, but this time incorporating our most advanced artificial intelligence rather than static discs?
Um, Well, I think we should do that. That's probably symbolic rather than in expectation that someone will detect it. But I think we should send out evidence that we exist. And of course, we've got to bear in mind that robots can now do more things that humans could do in the past. And to take another chapter in my book, I discuss manned spaceflight. What I say there is that if I was an American, I wouldn't want to spend any taxpayers' money on the manned program of NASA. That's because it's expensive, because it's risk averse. They've got to keep the risks down for civilians supported by the public purse. But I think we should cheer on the private companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, which can do things more cheaply because they can cut costs and take risks and launch into space the kind of adventurers who are prepared to accept a 10% chance of not coming back or even a one-way ticket. And I think manned spaceflight will really become a sort of adventure because the practical things that people were needed in space for in earlier decades can now be done by robotic fabricators. I think there will be huge structures fabricated in space, solar energy collectors and huge telescopes, lightweight under zero gravity, and maybe things on the moon. But that can be done by robots. And most of the other exploration can be done by robots. But people, I think, will want to go into space as an adventure, and we should cheer them on. And the reason we should cheer them on is that they will be the people who will perhaps eventually take evolution one stage further, because if they find themselves on Mars, they'll be badly adapted to living on Mars. So they will have every incentive to adapt to that hostile environment, and they'll be away from the regulators who will stop that happening on Earth. And so it's those people out there who are going to perhaps trigger a transition to some kind of post-human entities. And we should cheer them on. So they'll be cosmically important, even though they will just be a tiny fraction of the human population. And incidentally, I think it's a dangerous delusion to think of mass emigration to Mars to escape the world's problems. So here I disagree with Elon Musk and with my late colleague Stephen Hawking, who both advocated this, because dealing with climate change on the Earth is a doddle compared to terraforming Mars. So we should look after the Earth and expect that most people will be happy to stay here, but we should cheer on those adventurers who want to go far beyond.
Wow, thought to think about. Sir Martin Rees, former president of the Royal Society, emeritus professor of cosmology and astrophysics, the University of Cambridge, fellow Trinity College, member of the House of Lords, and author of On the Future, Prospects for Humanity. If somebody wants to connect with you, Martin, maybe they want a copy of your book, how can they do that?
Well, I hope it's in all good bookshops. It's certainly available from Amazon. And I should say it's a very digestible read and covers all these topics fairly briefly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. And if you guys want
Thank
to
you for
find
having
me,
me.
absolutely. If you guys want to find me and more of my interviews, you can go to tonyahall.net. I've got links to all my social sites. Thanks for watching.